The hand connected with the wall beside her head, not with a slap, but with a dull, percussive thud that seemed to shake the very bones of the building. Plaster dust, fine as powdered sugar, rained down onto the shoulder of her scrubs. Dr. Eris Thorne did not flinch. She did not scream. She had used up all her screams years ago, in the silent chambers of her own heart, where no one, least of all the man in front of her, could ever hear them. She simply closed her eyes, a slow, deliberate lowering of her lashes, a final curtain on a performance that had run for far too long. "You don't walk away from me," Dr. Marcus Vance hissed, his voice a low, furious tremor. His face, usually a carefully constructed mask of boyish charm for the benefit of patients and hospital benefactors, was mottled with rage. A vein pulsed at his temple, a frantic, tiny heart beating out a rhythm of pure entitlement. Not now, not before the gala. Eris opened her eyes. They were the color of a winter sea, deep and cool and exhausted. "The gala is not my concern, Marcus." "It is your concern. It is our concern." He pressed closer, his body a wall of expensive cologne and sterile anger. "We are being honored. I am being honored. You are supposed to be on my arm, smiling, proud." She thought about the honor. The Vance Thorne procedure, the hospital board had christened it. A revolutionary technique in cardiothoracic surgery that could repair complex aortic dissections with minimal invasive trauma. It was her work, her late nights in the lab, her painstaking research, her hands that had first guided the microscopic instruments. He had watched, contributed a few minor suggestions, and then, with the casual audacity of a man who believed the world was his buffet, had slapped his name on the front of the paper. He had not updated the file on her. He was working from a version of Eris Thorne that was years out of date, a version that would have swallowed her protest and worn the pretty dress. That version had expired. "I am tired," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 nights spent staring at the ceiling, 100 dinners where her accomplishments were reframed as his triumphs, a dozen brutal arguments that ended with her apologizing for his anger. "Tired?" He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You just finished a 7-hour surgery, Eris. You're running on adrenaline. You'll be fine. Go home, shower, put on the emerald dress. The one I bought you." She could feel the vibration of the hospital around them, the distant rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the hushed murmur of the night shift taking over. They were in the West Wing corridor, a quiet, forgotten artery of the Elysian Medical Center that connected the surgical suites to the private patient lounges. It was supposed to be empty at this hour. He had counted on that. "No," she said. The word was not loud, but it was solid. It was a foundation. Marcus's eyes, the color of polished mahogany that so many nurses had swooned over, narrowed into slits. The charm fell away completely, revealing the rotten structure beneath. "What did you say?" "I said no, Marcus." She met his gaze, and for the first time she did not try to manage his reaction. She did not soften her tone or shrink her posture. "The dress is at the apartment. All of my things are. I've arranged for them to be moved into storage tomorrow. I will not be attending the gala. I will not be standing on that stage with you. And I will not be on your arm ever again." He stared at her, his mind clearly struggling to parse the information. It was like watching a computer fail to recognize a command it had always processed before. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate but had always been compliant. This new data did not compute. "You're leaving me?" The question was laced with genuine, sputtering disbelief, as if she had just claimed she could fly. "After everything I've done for you? I gave you a platform, Eris. I made your work visible." "My work was already excellent," she replied, her voice steady as iron wrapped in silk. "You just stood in its light." That was the blow that landed. Not the rejection, not the departure, but the insult to his carefully curated genius. His face contorted, and he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. The grip was punishing. "You ungrateful bitch!" he snarled, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You are nothing without me. A lab rat. I put you in the operating theater." "Let go of my arm," she said, her voice dropping to match his, but hers was cold, not hot. It was the cold of deep space. He didn't. He tightened his grip, pulling her closer. "You have an obligation, to me, to this partnership." "There is no partnership." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "There is only you and what you take." For a split second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not remorse, not regret. It was the frantic, cornered panic of an imposter about to be exposed, and that panic, as it always did with him, curdled into violence. He shoved her. It was not a titanic push, but it was sharp, brutal, and perfectly calculated to use her exhaustion against her. Her balance, already precarious after hours on her feet, evaporated. Her heel caught on the lip of the top stair of the short marble flight that led down to the lounge's lower level. She did not scream. The world tilted, a sickening lurch of polished floors and recessed lighting. She saw Marcus's face, a mask of shock and dawning horror. Not because he had hurt her, but because he had been so clumsy, so overt. He was a man who preferred his cruelty to be elegant, deniable. This was not. Her body hit the third step with a sickening crack that echoed in the corridor. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded in her left shoulder and ribs. She tumbled, a graceless collection of limbs, coming to rest in a heap at the bottom of the 5 steps. Her head connected with the marble floor, not hard enough to break consciousness, but with a solid, jarring impact that made the world swim in a nauseous haze. She lay there, the smell of antiseptic and Marcus's expensive cologne filling her senses. She could hear him scrambling down the steps, his voice a frantic whisper. "Eris, oh God, Eris, get up, get up!" He knelt beside her, his hands hovering, unsure of what to do. His panic was palpable. This was not part of the plan. This was messy. This had consequences. "You tripped," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "You were exhausted. You weren't looking. You tripped. Do you understand?" Eris stared up at the ceiling, at the single recessed light that seemed to pulse with the throbbing in her head. She understood perfectly. He was writing the narrative. He was crafting the lie that would save him. Her pain, her body, was just an inconvenient plot point he needed to resolve. A sound cut through the haze. It was not a loud sound. It was the quiet, deliberate clink of a heavy glass being set down on a marble-topped table. It came from the shadows of the private lounge at the end of the corridor, a space reserved for the hospital's most elite patrons, a space that should have been empty. Marcus froze, his head snapped up, peering into the gloom. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice tight with fear. A figure detached itself from the deeper darkness. He did not rush. He was not performing. He moved with the unhurried, liquid grace of a predator that knows it owns the entire forest. He was tall and dressed in a charcoal suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to have been woven around him. His black hair was cut with severe precision. His face was a study in stillness, handsome but remote, his eyes dark and impossibly deep. It was Jin-Woo Kwon. The air in the corridor changed. It grew heavy, thick with a sudden absolute authority. The distant beeps and hums of the hospital seemed to fall silent, holding their breath. Jin-Woo Kwon was not just a benefactor. His family owned this hospital. They owned the land it was built on, the company that had constructed it, the factories that produced the machines within it, and the banks that held its immense wealth. He was not a boss. He was a sovereign. Marcus scrambled to his feet, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of authority. He knew who Mr. Kwon was, in the way a courtier knows the name of a distant, all-powerful emperor. He had never seen him this close. The sheer, gravitational pull of the man's presence was disorienting. "Mr. Kwon," Marcus stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. Dr. Thorne, She had a fall. Jinwoo's dark eyes did not even flicker toward Marcus. They were fixed on Eris, lying broken at the bottom of the stairs. There was no pity in his gaze. There was something else, a kind of cold, quiet recognition. He had seen this before. He took another step forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished floor. He stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at the scene. His stillness was more intimidating than any overt threat. It was the stillness of a bomb before it detonates. She tripped, Marcus repeated, his voice gaining a desperate, pleading edge. He was trying to sell the narrative. He was trying to get ahead of the story. Jinwoo's gaze finally, slowly moved to Marcus. He didn't look at Marcus's face. He looked at the hand Marcus had used to shove Eris. He looked at the faint sheen of sweat on Marcus's brow. He looked at the flicker of panic in his eyes. Jinwoo Kwon was a man who read the footnotes of the world, and Marcus Vance was a poorly written, easily deciphered text. "Security," Jinwoo said. The word was spoken at a normal volume. It was not a shout. It was a statement of fact. And yet it had the force of a command that could not be disobeyed. From the shadows behind him and from the other end of the corridor, figures materialized. 2 men, then 4. They wore the same dark, impeccably tailored suits as Jinwoo, with a subtle pin on the lapel, the Kwon family crest. They moved with a fluid, disciplined silence that spoke of years of training. They were not hospital security. They were something else entirely. Marcus's face went white. He took a step back, holding his hands up. "Wait, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Dr. Vance. My family is on the board. She just fell. It was an accident." The men did not pause. They did not speak. 2 of them flanked Marcus, their movements economical and precise. One placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that looked almost gentle but had the unyielding force of a hydraulic press. Marcus's entire body went rigid. Jinwoo finally spoke again, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. It was the kind of voice that signed multi-billion-dollar deals and death warrants with the same flat intonation. "You are mistaken," he said, his eyes still locked on Marcus. She did not trip. It was not an accusation. It was a verdict. "Take him to the sub-level," Jinwoo continued, his gaze now shifting back to Eris. "Confiscate his phone and his credentials. Have Dr. Allister from the board meet me in my office in 10 minutes. Inform him that the Vance family's tenure at this hospital is over." Marcus's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. My father—" The hand on his shoulder tightened, and Marcus let out a pained gasp. The 2 men turned him and began to walk him away, his expensive shoes scuffing pathetically against the floor. "My father will hear about this," he shouted, his voice echoing down the corridor, thin and reedy. "You have no right." Jinwoo watched him go, his expression unchanging. He had not raised his voice. He had not made a threat. He had simply rearranged reality to his liking. The corridor was silent again, save for the sound of Eris's own ragged breathing. The other 2 men remained, standing like statues at a respectful distance. Jinwoo descended the stairs, his movements as fluid and controlled as before. He knelt beside her, not too close, careful not to crowd her. The scent of his suit, clean, sharp, like cold air and expensive wool, overwhelmed the lingering smell of Marcus's fear. He looked at her, and for the first time his eyes held a flicker of something other than cold authority. It was a clinical assessment, but not without a sliver of concern. "Where does it hurt, Dr. Thorne?" The use of her title, spoken with such quiet respect in this moment of her deepest humiliation, was a strange and unexpected anchor. "My shoulder," she whispered, the word scraping her throat. "My head." He nodded slowly. His hand moved, and for a terrifying second she thought he was going to touch her. Instead, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, dark phone. He spoke into it in Korean, his voice a low, rapid murmur. The language was unfamiliar, but the tone was universal. It was the sound of absolute command. When he was done, he looked back at her. "My personal physician is on his way. He is discreet. A medical team will be here in 2 minutes. They will take you to the penthouse suite on the top floor, not to the emergency room. No record of this will be entered into the hospital's system." She stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. The pain in her body was a roaring fire, but her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. Why? Why was he doing this? Why? She managed to ask. Jinwoo's expression did not change, but a new layer of depth seemed to settle in his dark eyes. He seemed to consider the question, not as an impertinence, but as a valid query that deserved a precise answer. "My grandmother is a patient on the 4th floor," he said, his voice quiet. "Sun Hee Kwan, room 412. She has a failing heart." Eris's breath hitched. Mrs. Kwan, the formidable, elegant old woman with eyes as sharp as her grandson's, and a smile that she reserved only for a select few. Eris had been overseeing her care for months. She had sat with her late at night when she couldn't sleep, talking about art and poetry, long after her official duties were done. She hadn't known who she was, not really, just a wealthy patient with a private room. But she had liked her. "She speaks of you," Jinwoo continued, his voice a low rumble. "She calls you the doctor with the kind hands and the sad smile. She said you were the only one who saw a person and not just a failing organ. For the past 2 months, I have received a full report on your life every morning." Eris felt a cold shock run through her, a feeling that had nothing to do with her injuries, a report every morning. He had been watching her. He knew about Marcus. He knew about the stolen work, the quiet suffering, the slow erosion of her spirit. He had been observing, collecting data, waiting, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. That was the silence that now filled the space between them. It was a silence full of unspoken information, of surveillance and judgment, and now of intervention. "You're safe now, Dr. Thorne," he said, and it sounded less like a reassurance and more like a statement of a newly established, unalterable fact, as if her safety was a company he had just acquired. The medical team arrived then, as silent and efficient as his security. They moved with a practiced grace, their faces impassive. They assessed her, their hands gentle but firm, speaking in low, professional tones. A stretcher was brought. As they prepared to lift her, Jinwoo stood up, a tall, dark silhouette against the sterile light. He looked down at her one last time before they moved her. "Rest," he commanded softly. "We have work to do." The world swam as they lifted her. The pain was a dull, constant roar, but underneath it, for the first time in years, there was a strange and disorienting feeling. It was not hope. It was not relief. It was the cold, terrifying, and utterly profound sensation of being seen, correctly. The penthouse suite was less a hospital room and more a minimalist palace in the sky. The walls were vast panes of glass, revealing a panoramic view of the city's glittering sprawl. The furniture was sparse and architectural, a low-slung sofa in dove gray, a single chair that was more sculpture than seating, a bed that seemed to float above the floor. There was no art on the walls. The city itself was the art. Aris lay in the bed, the sheets cool and impossibly soft against her skin. Dr. Han, Jinwoo's personal physician, had been a phantom of efficiency. He had examined her with quiet, respectful hands, his touch clinical yet gentle. A hairline fracture in the clavicle, 2 bruised ribs, a mild concussion. He had given her something for the pain that didn't cloud her thoughts, just smoothed the sharp edges of her agony into a dull, manageable ache. He had bandaged her, settled her into the bed, and vanished as silently as he had appeared. She was alone, but the feeling of being watched lingered, not in a menacing way, but in a comprehensive, all-encompassing one. She felt like a specimen that had been carefully transferred to a new, sterile, and very expensive enclosure. She turned her head, wincing at the pull in her neck, and looked out at the city. The lights blinked and pulsed like a million scattered jewels. She had lived in this city for 10 years, but she had never seen it from this vantage point. From up here, it looked orderly, beautiful, a place of logic and design. It was a lie, of course. Down there, it was a messy, chaotic tangle of lives and desperation, just like the pristine corridors of the hospital far below. The door to the suite opened with a soft electronic hiss. Jin-Woo Kwon entered. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and adorned with a single severe-looking black watch. He carried a slim, dark tablet in one hand. He did not approach the bed immediately. He went to the window, standing in silhouette against the city lights, his presence filling the vast, empty room. "The board has accepted the Vance family's resignation, effective immediately," he said, without turning around. "Their shares in the hospital consortium have been acquired. My foundation purchased them 30 minutes ago." Eris absorbed this information. It was like being told a mountain range had been moved. The Vance family was an institution at Elysian. Marcus's father, his grandfather, they were woven into the very fabric of the place. And in less than an hour, Jin-Woo Kwon had unraveled them. "Marcus has been released from the sub-level," he continued, his voice calm and even. "He is no longer on hospital grounds. His access has been revoked. He has been legally instructed to have no contact with you." Eris thought of Marcus, furious, humiliated, cast out. A part of her, a part she was not proud of, felt a grim, cold satisfaction. But a larger part of her, the part that had lived in fear for so long, knew it wasn't over. Men like Marcus did not accept defeat. They saw it as an injustice to be rectified. "He won't listen," she said, her voice raspy. Jin-Woo finally turned to face her. He walked over and placed the tablet on the bedside table next to a glass of water that had appeared while she was sleeping. "He will," he said. It was another statement of fact. He pulled the sculptural chair closer to the bed and sat down. He did not lean back. He sat on the edge, his posture alert, his hands resting on his knees. It was the posture of a man waiting for a meeting to begin. "I have read the preliminary abstract for your paper on cellular regeneration in myocardial tissue," he said, changing the subject with startling abruptness. "The one Marcus Vance presented as his own in Zurich last month." Eris's heart gave a painful throb that had nothing to do with her injuries. "How did you get that?" The abstract was on her personal laptop, password protected. "My team is very thorough." He offered no other explanation. "The methodology is elegant. The potential applications are significant, far beyond what Vance described in his presentation. He did not understand what he was stealing." She stared at him. He was talking about her work, not her pain, not her fall, not her relationship, her work. He spoke of it with a detached, analytical appreciation of a fellow intellectual. In that moment, he was not a mafia boss or a corporate titan. He was someone who had read her language and understood its grammar. "He wanted the fame," she said quietly. "He didn't care about the science." "Fame is a temporary currency. Power is a structural asset," Jin-Woo replied, as if explaining a simple business principle. "He chose poorly." He paused, his dark eyes studying her face. "You have allowed your work to be undervalued for a long time, Dr. Thorne." A flush of anger, hot and sharp, cut through the haze of pain medication. "It's not that simple." "No," he agreed, surprising her. "It is not. It is complicated. It involves emotional attachments, professional dependencies, and the slow, corrosive effect of believing the narratives others create for you." He leaned forward slightly. "But the complication is now over. The dependency is severed. So the question is, what narrative will you create for yourself now that you are free to write it?" The question hung in the air between them, vast and terrifying and exhilarating. For years, her life had been a series of reactions to Marcus, his moods, his ambitions, his needs. The idea of a life that was a proactive creation of her own was a foreign country she had forgotten how to imagine. "I don't know," she confessed, the admission feeling like a failure. "That is an acceptable answer," he said, standing up. "For now." He picked up the tablet from the bedside table and held it out to her. "This is for you. It has military-grade security and a direct encrypted connection to my company's research servers. It also contains all of the files from your personal laptop, along with every piece of research you have conducted over the past 5 years. My team found them, scattered across various university servers and hospital archives, many without your name on them. We have consolidated them. She took the tablet. It was cool and heavy in her hands, a consolidated record of her own life's work, handed to her by a stranger who had stolen it back for her. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left her speechless. "Your credentials at Elysian have been elevated," he said, walking back toward the door. "You now have unrestricted access to all labs and research facilities. You will be reporting directly to me. Your first project will be to establish a new department, the Thorne Institute for Surgical Innovation. Your budget is, for all practical purposes, unlimited." He was at the door now. He paused, with his hand on the panel. She started, but no words came. What could she say? Thank you? It felt laughably inadequate. Who are you? She already knew, and it terrified her. He seemed to understand her paralysis. My grandmother asked me to ensure that the doctor with the kind hands was given the resources to fix more than just one failing heart, he said softly. She is a very persuasive woman. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Rest, Dr. Thorne. Your new laboratory will be ready in 3 days. The door hissed shut, and he was gone. Eris lay back against the pillows, the cool weight of the tablet in her lap. She looked from the device to the city lights outside. An unlimited budget, her own institute, her name, not as an afterthought, but as the headline. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, delivered to her on a platter of violence and surveillance by a man who moved through the world like a ghost, rewriting reality with a quiet word. She felt a tremor of fear, deep and primal. She had just escaped one powerful, controlling man, only to fall into the orbit of another, one whose power was so absolute it was almost abstract. But there was a difference. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout, the kind that builds instead of just takes. Marcus had wanted to own her light. Jin Wukwan, it seemed, wanted to plug it into his grid. She wasn't sure which was more dangerous, but as she lay there, the dull ache in her bones a reminder of her old life, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer a victim. She was an asset, and she was about to find out exactly what she was worth. The next 3 days were a strange limbo. Eris remained in the penthouse suite, a gilded cage where the world was held at bay. Meals appeared silently, delivered by staff who never made eye contact. Her clothes from the apartment arrived, freshly laundered and pressed, hung in a closet the size of her old bedroom. There was a collection of new clothes as well in her exact size, simple, elegant pieces in shades of gray, cream, and black. Cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers. It was a wardrobe of quiet power, a uniform for her new life. She spent most of her time with the tablet. At first, she was hesitant, the feeling of being monitored a constant, prickling presence at the back of her neck. But the lure of her own work, finally collected and organized, was too strong to resist. She read through her old papers, the ones Marcus had buried or claimed. She saw the patterns, the threads of inquiry she had been forced to abandon to serve his more glamorous, less substantive projects. A fire began to burn in her, a low, steady flame she had thought long extinguished. It was the fire of pure intellectual curiosity. She started making notes, sketching out new lines of research, her mind racing ahead, free for the first time in years from the need to justify its own existence. She was not just a surgeon. She was a scientist, a creator. Jinwoo did not visit. He did not call. But his presence was constant. A rare, out-of-print medical text she had once mentioned wanting to read appeared on her breakfast tray. A complex piece of diagnostic software she needed for her new research was installed on the tablet overnight. He was not managing her. He was facilitating her. He was removing obstacles before she even knew they were there. It was the most unsettling and intoxicating form of care she had ever experienced. On the 3rd day, Dr. Han returned. He examined her shoulder, his movements precise and economical. "The fracture is setting cleanly," he announced. "The bruising is fading. You are recovering well, Dr. Thorne." "I want to leave this room," she said. It was not a request. Dr. Han gave a slight bow of his head. "Mr. Kwan anticipated this. A car is waiting for you downstairs." An hour later, she was dressed in a cream-colored silk blouse and black trousers, a sling supporting her left arm. She felt fragile and powerful all at once. A silent assistant, a young woman with a sharp haircut and an earpiece, escorted her to a private elevator. It descended without a sound, opening not into the main lobby but into a sterile private parking garage. A black sedan, long and sleek as a shark, was waiting, its engine purring softly. The driver, a man with the build of a heavyweight boxer and the impassive face of a statue, held the rear door open for her. The interior of the car was a cocoon of black leather and silence. The windows were tinted so darkly that the outside world was just a muted gray smear. As the car pulled out into the city traffic, the silence inside remained absolute. It was like moving through the world without having to touch it. They did not drive for long. The car turned into the service entrance of a gleaming new tower of glass and steel that stood adjacent to the main hospital. It was a building Eris had watched being constructed over the past year, a silent, monolithic structure whose purpose was a subject of much speculation among the hospital staff. The car glided into another subterranean garage and stopped. The door was opened for her. Jin-Woo Kwan was standing there waiting. He was dressed in a dark blue suit that made the charcoal one he'd worn before seem casual. He looked at her, his eyes taking in the sling, the determined set of her jaw. He gave a single brief nod, a gesture of approval. "Dr. Thorne," he said, "welcome to your institute." He led her to another private elevator. As they ascended, he spoke. "The top 3 floors are yours. The labs are equipped with the latest generation of microsurgical robotics and cellular imaging technology. I have taken the liberty of poaching the top 3 research teams from Johns Hopkins and the Karolinska Institute. They arrive next week. Your administrative assistant, Miss Choi, is already setting up your office. She is efficient." The elevator doors opened into a space that stole her breath. It was a vast, open-plan office, bathed in natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was even more spectacular than the one from the penthouse, but it wasn't the view that held her. It was the space itself. It was designed with a minimalist, almost monastic elegance, clean lines, natural wood, and brushed steel. In the center of the space, a magnificent spiral staircase made of glass and chrome snaked its way up to the floors above. A woman who could only be Miss Choi, sharp, severe, and already on her phone, gave them a brisk nod as they passed. Jin-Woo led Aris toward a set of glass doors at the far end of the room. "This will be your personal office," he said, pushing the door open. It was a corner office with 2 walls of pure glass. It contained only a large desk made from a single piece of pale, polished wood, a black ergonomic chair, and a long, low bookshelf. The desk was empty except for a single framed photograph. Eris walked closer, her heart beginning to pound. It was a photo of her. She was a young resident, years younger, standing in front of a poster for her very first medical presentation. She was smiling, a wide, unburdened smile she hardly recognized. Her eyes were bright with excitement and pride. It was a picture taken long before Marcus had chiseled away at her confidence, long before her smile had learned to be sad. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. "Our archives are extensive," was all he said. He walked to the window, giving her a moment. "I thought it was important for you to remember the person who began this work, before it was complicated." She looked from the photograph of her younger, hopeful self to the reflection of the woman she was now, standing in this impossible office, a creation of this powerful, enigmatic man. The anger she had felt before was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "This is very generous, Mr. Kwan," she said, turning to face him. "It is also a cage, a much larger, more beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless." He did not seem surprised or offended by her directness. He met her gaze, his own unreadable. All structures are cages of a sort, Dr. Thorne. The question is whether they are designed for containment or for support. A trellis is a cage for a rose, but it allows it to grow toward the sun. And what if the rose doesn't want to grow in the direction you've chosen? She challenged, her voice quiet but firm. A long silence stretched between them. He was not a man who was challenged often. She could see the calculations happening behind his dark eyes. He was recalibrating his assessment of her. He had not expected this. He had expected gratitude, perhaps fear, not defiance. The direction, he said finally, his voice a low, deliberate murmur, is toward the full realization of your work, the work you started in that photograph. If you find at any point that my support hinders that goal instead of enabling it, you have only to say the word. The car that brought you here will take you anywhere else you wish to go. It was a promise of freedom, but she knew it was also a test. He was assessing her commitment. I don't leave because things become complicated, Mr. Kwan, she said, her eyes holding his. I leave when they become untenable. My work here has not yet begun. I have no intention of leaving. For the first time, she saw something shift in his face. It was not quite a smile. It was a flicker of something warmer, a brief, fleeting expression of respect. It was the look of a master craftsman acknowledging the quality of a tool he had chosen. Good, he said. The word was simple, but it felt like a contract being signed. Miss Choi has your schedule. Your first meeting is with the legal team in 30 minutes. They need your signature on the patent filings. He paused. The patents for the Vance Thorne procedure are being refiled, under a single name. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving her alone with the ghost of her younger self and the dizzying prospect of her future. She looked down at the photograph again, at the girl with the bright, hopeful eyes. She had been lost for a long time. Now, a quiet sovereign in a dark blue suit had found her and placed her on a throne she had built herself without ever knowing it. She reached out and touched the glass over the photo. It was time to get to work. The weeks that followed were a blur of focused, exhilarating labor. The Thorne Institute became her entire world. The poached research teams arrived, brilliant, intense men and women who looked at her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. They had been lured here by unimaginable salaries and the promise of unlimited resources, all to work under a woman whose name had been a mere footnote until a month ago. Eris thrived. She shed the last vestiges of her exhaustion like a second skin. The pain in her shoulder faded to a memory. She worked with a ferocious, joyful intensity she hadn't felt since she was a resident. She led meetings. She directed research. She spent long, glorious hours in the pristine labs, her hands steady, her mind sharp. She was not just managing. She was creating, building something from the ground up that was hers, truly and completely. Jin Woo remained a distant, powerful presence. He never visited the Institute unannounced. Their interactions were confined to brief, formal meetings in his stark office high in the main Kwan Tower, a place that made the hospital penthouse look modest. They discussed budgets, staffing, and strategy. He was always direct, his questions precise. He listened to her assessments with an unnerving stillness, his gaze never leaving her face. In these meetings, she saw the machinery of his power. He would take a call, his voice dropping to that low, rapid Korean, and a multi-million-dollar supply chain issue would be resolved in under a minute. An assistant would enter with a document. He would sign it without breaking eye contact with her, and a hostile corporate takeover on another continent would be finalized. He moved pieces on a global chessboard with the same quiet efficiency with which he had rearranged her life. And yet, there were other moments. Quiet, unexpected moments of connection. He learned that she missed the specific, bitter taste of the coffee from a small cafe near her old apartment. The next morning, a personal barista and a machine identical to the one from the cafe were installed in her office kitchenette. He noticed her rubbing her neck after a long day hunched over a microscope. The next day, a renowned physical therapist specializing in ergonomics appeared for a consultation. These were not the gestures of a romantic suitor. They were the actions of a meticulous owner maintaining a prized asset. but they were also acts of profound, unnerving attention. He saw everything. Their relationship, if it could be called that, developed in the spaces between words. They began having dinner once a week, in a small private dining room off his office. The food was always exquisite, but the meals were not about food. They were about the quiet rhythm of their conversation. She would talk about her research, her voice alive with passion, and he would listen, asking sharp, insightful questions that pushed her to think deeper. He would, in turn, occasionally talk about his world, not the dark, rumored side of it, but the cold, logical world of global markets and power dynamics. He spoke of empires as if they were simple equations to be solved. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his stillness. A slight tightening of his jaw meant he was displeased with a market report. A fractional widening of his eyes meant a piece of her research had genuinely surprised him. She was learning the language of his silence. And him? He seemed to be learning what it was to be around someone who did not fear him and who did not want anything from him other than the space he had already provided. He was used to sycophants and enemies. A partner was a new variable. One evening they were sitting in the private dining room, a half-empty bottle of wine between them. She had just spent an hour excitedly explaining a breakthrough her team had made in tissue grafting. "You are happy here," he stated. It was an observation, not a question. "I have my work," she said. "I have a team that respects me. I have resources I could never have imagined. I am not being erased. Yes, I am happy." "Good." He looked down into his wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. "The Obsidian Gala is next Saturday. The hospital board is formally announcing the launch of the institute. They will be introducing you as its director." Eris felt a jolt. The gala. The event that had been the catalyst for her life's implosion. She had almost forgotten about it. "I will be expected to give a speech," she said, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "You will," he confirmed, "and you will be brilliant." "Marcus will be there," she stated, a cold dread seeping into her. It wasn't a question. She knew his ego. She knew his family. They would find a way. Jinwoo looked up and his eyes were cold. "No, he will not." But she knew he was wrong. She knew Marcus. His humiliation would be a festering wound, and the only balm he knew was public vindication. He would see the gala as his stage, his chance to reclaim his narrative. Meanwhile, in a sterile, minimalist apartment that felt more like a designer prison, Marcus Vance was losing his mind. He had been professionally neutered. His name was poison at every major hospital in the country. The calls Jinwoo Kwan's office had made had been brief, quiet, and utterly devastating. His father, stripped of his board seat and his pride, refused to even speak to him. He spent his days pacing, fueled by a toxic cocktail of fury and disbelief. He replayed the scene in the corridor over and over. But in his version, he was the victim. Eris had been hysterical. She had attacked him. He had only defended himself. She had tripped. "She'll come back," he muttered to his reflection in a darkened window. "Give her a week. She can't do it without me. This Kwan fellow, he's just a rich dilettante. He'll get bored. She'll come crawling back." But a week passed, then 2, then a month. The silence from Aris was absolute. He heard whispers, rumors of a new, lavishly funded institute, an institute with her name on it. The rage became a frantic, desperate obsession. He hired a private investigator, a seedy man who came back with nothing. "The woman's a ghost, Mr. Vance. Lives in a Kwan-owned building, travels in Kwan-owned cars, works in a Kwan-owned lab. The security is not civilian. I can't get close." His final, fatal miscalculation was born of this desperation. He went to his lawyers, a new, cheaper firm, as his family's powerful attorneys no longer took his calls. He instructed them to file a lawsuit. "I want to sue her," he announced, his voice ringing with a mad, theatrical confidence. "For intellectual property theft. The Vance Thorne procedure was a shared asset. She has stolen it, repackaged it, and is profiting from it under the umbrella of this new institute. I want an injunction. I want to freeze all their work." His lawyer, a young, hungry man named Peterson, looked at him with wide eyes. Sue Eris Thorne? And by extension, Quan Industries? Mr. Vance, that's not advisable. Do it, Marcus snarled. He thinks he can ruin me? I'll tie them up in court for years. I'll bleed them. I'll expose her as the fraud she is. It was a pathetic, suicidal gesture, the equivalent of a drowning man trying to punch a battleship. But in his delusion, Marcus saw it as a masterstroke. He believed in the power of the law, not understanding that men like Jinwoo Kwon did not operate within the law. They operated above it. The law was just another tool in their workshop. The lawsuit was filed. It was a public declaration of war, and it gave Jinwoo Kwon exactly what he needed, a reason to move from defense to annihilation. The night of the Obsidian Gala arrived. The great glass atrium of the Elysian Medical Center had been transformed. Thousands of tiny lights were strung up in the high ceiling, mimicking a starry sky. An orchestra played softly from a raised dais. The city's elite drifted through the space, a river of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos, their laughter tinkling like ice in crystal glasses. Eris stood on a balcony overlooking the crowd, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. She wore an emerald green gown. It was not the one Marcus had bought her. This one had been designed for her, a column of shimmering silk that was both elegant and severe. It was armor. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a film of her own life. Below, people who had once ignored her or treated her with condescending familiarity were now pointing her out, whispering her name with a new, respectful inflection. Dr. Thorne, the head of the new institute. Jinwoo appeared at her side, a silent, dark presence in a perfectly cut tuxedo. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at her. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," she answered honestly, "but it doesn't matter." He took the champagne flute from her hand and set it on a passing waiter's tray. "It is the only thing that matters," he said. "Your readiness." He offered her his arm. "It is time." She took his arm, her fingers resting on the fine wool of his jacket. His warmth was a steady, solid presence. They descended the grand staircase into the heart of the crowd. The whispers grew louder. Conversations paused. All eyes turned to them, the sovereign and his new, brilliant protégé. They were making their way toward the stage when a disturbance rippled through the crowd near the entrance. A man's voice raised in anger. "Let go of me! I have an invitation! My name is Dr. Marcus Vance." Aris froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had known it. She had known he would come. Jinwoo's hand came up to cover hers on his arm, his touch firm and reassuring. "It's handled," he murmured, his voice a low vibration she felt more than heard. He did not even turn his head, but it was not handled. Marcus, his face flushed, his hair disheveled, broke through the line of security. He had clearly been drinking. His eyes, wild and furious, scanned the crowd and locked on her. He strode toward them, a man on a collision course with his own destiny. The crowd parted before him, a collective gasp rippling through the room. The orchestra faltered, then fell silent. "Eris!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the sudden, vast silence. He stopped a few feet from them, his chest heaving. He ignored Jinwoo completely, his entire focus a laser beam of resentment aimed at her. "There you are," he said, a sneer twisting his handsome features, "hiding behind your new benefactor. Did you think I would just disappear? Did you think you could steal our life's work and I would just let you?" Eris felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, curious, judgmental. The old shame, the old fear tried to rise up, but she pushed it down. She was not that woman anymore. She straightened her shoulders. "There was no our work, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and cold, carrying across the silent atrium. "There was only my work, which you stole." He laughed, a raw, ugly sound. "Is that the story you're telling now, after everything I did for you? You have an obligation to me, a legal one." He took a step closer, his hand reaching for her. You are going to walk out of here with me right now, and we are going to fix this." Before his fingers could touch her, Jinwoo moved. It was a small, almost lazy movement. He simply shifted his body, placing himself between Eris and Marcus. He was not aggressive. He was simply present, a wall of quiet, immovable power. "That is enough, Dr. Vance," Jinwoo said, his voice dangerously soft. Marcus finally seemed to register him. He looked Jinwoo up and down, a flicker of the old fear in his eyes, but it was quickly swamped by his drunken rage. "You stay out of this," he spat. "This is between me and my partner, my wife, for all intents and purposes." A low murmur went through the crowd. Jinwoo's face remained a mask of perfect, chilling calm. He was not looking at Marcus. He was looking at someone over Marcus's shoulder, his assistant, Miss Choi, who stood at the edge of the circle holding a tablet. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Wife," Jinwoo repeated, the word tasting like ash. He finally looked at Marcus, and his eyes were not angry. They were empty. It was the kind of emptiness that precedes an extinction-level event. "You seem to be working from a version of her that has never been accurate." He raised a hand, and the massive screen behind the orchestra stage, which had been displaying the hospital's logo, flickered to life. The image was grainy, black and white. It was security footage. It showed a hospital corridor. It showed Marcus grabbing Eris's arm. It showed him shoving her. It showed her body tumbling down the short flight of stairs. The entire atrium was utterly silent, the only sound the faint, tinny audio from the video. Marcus stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. That's been edited," he stammered, his voice weak. "She tripped. She was hysterical. She fell." "She tripped!" Jinwoo echoed, his voice dripping with a cold, silken irony. "That was the official story your family intended to promote." His family swore, he said, his voice rising just enough to address the entire rapt audience, that she tripped. He took out his own phone. It was the same sleek, dark phone he'd used in the corridor that night. He tapped the screen. "Unfortunately for you," he continued, his voice returning to its flat, deadly calm, "your reputation for clumsiness is not limited to Dr. Thorne." He looked directly at Marcus. "3 weeks ago, you filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming ownership of Dr. Thorne's intellectual property." He angled the phone so Marcus could see it. On the screen was a live video call. The face on the call was a man Marcus knew well, Charles Webb, the head of the patent services firm that held all of his, and his family's, patents. Webb looked terrified. "Mr. Webb," Jinwoo said, his voice casual, "would you be so kind as to inform Dr. Vance of your firm's current ownership status?" Webb swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously. "Quan Industries completed the acquisition of Webb Patent Group this morning, sir." Marcus's legs seemed to tremble. "And the preliminary audit of Dr. Vance's patents?" Jinwoo prompted. "We've found significant irregularities, sir," Webb stammered. "Evidence of falsified data, unattributed source material, a pattern of intellectual property theft going back almost a decade." Jinwoo swiped the screen. A new face appeared, a haggard-looking man in a suit. It was Alistair, the former board member, the Vance family's staunchest ally. "Mr. Alistair," Jinwoo said, "please tell Dr. Vance about the current status of his family's shares in the hospital consortium." Alistair looked like he was about to be sick. "The Quan Foundation acquired our entire portfolio to cover outstanding debts." The phone was a weapon, and Jinwoo was wielding it with surgical precision, cutting away every pillar of Marcus's life, piece by piece in front of the entire world. "Debts," Jinwoo mused. He put the phone away and looked at Marcus, whose face was now a ghastly shade of gray. "It seems your family's entire financial empire was a house of cards, Dr. Vance. All it took was a little push." The double meaning hung in the air, brutal and undeniable. Marcus stared at him, his mouth opening and closing silently. The arrogance, the rage, The entire edifice of his personality was crumbling in real time. All that was left was the raw, pathetic terror of a man who had just realized he was not just beaten, but erased. He dropped to his knees. The sound of his tuxedo trousers hitting the marble floor was shockingly loud in the silent room. He looked up at Aris, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading horror. "Eris," he whispered. It was a pathetic, broken sound. "Please, tell him to stop." She looked down at him, at the man who had taken her work, her confidence, her peace. She felt nothing, not pity, not triumph, just a vast, empty stillness. The kind of silence that doesn't echo. The kind that settles. "No," she said. Jin-woo gave a quiet signal. The two silent men in suits materialized from the crowd. They took Marcus by the arms, lifting him to his feet. He didn't struggle. He was sobbing now, great, racking sobs that shook his entire body. He was a hollowed-out thing, a ruin. They dragged him away, his cries echoing through the atrium until the doors swung shut behind him, cutting off the sound. A stunned silence remained. Then, slowly, someone began to clap, then another and another, until the entire room erupted in applause. It was not for the drama, it was for the decisive, absolute victory. Jin-woo turned to Eris. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on her. He reached out and gently brushed a stray piece of plaster dust from her shoulder, a phantom from a battle that was now, finally, over. He then turned, took the microphone from the abandoned stand, and walked onto the stage. The applause died down. "Tonight," he began, his voice calm and resonant, filling the atrium, "we are here to celebrate the future of medicine. For too long, true innovation has been stifled, and true innovators have been silenced." His eyes found Ares in the crowd. "Some people will take your silence for weakness. They will stand in your light and call it their own. They will build their hollow kingdoms on the foundations of your genius." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Those days are over, at least at this hospital." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his severe features. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the future. A mind of singular brilliance, a spirit of unbreakable resilience, and the true architect of the surgical techniques that will define the next generation of cardiac care. Ladies and gentlemen, the founder and director of the Thorne Institute, Dr. Eris Thorne." He held his hand out to her. The applause was deafening. It washed over her, a wave of validation and recognition. Slowly, as if in a dream, she walked toward the stage, toward the man who had not just saved her, but had shown her her own power. As she took his hand and stepped up into the light, she felt a slow, profound exhale release from a place deep within her. It was the breath she had been holding for 10 years. Her smile, when it came, was not the sad, tired smile of the past. It was bright. It reached her eyes. It was the smile of the girl in the photograph, but with the hard-won wisdom of the woman she had become. She was home. She was safe. She was seen. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed and the atrium had fallen silent, Eris and Jin-woo stood on the private balcony of his office. The city glittered below them, a silent, sprawling kingdom. The cool night air felt clean against her skin. She was no longer wearing the emerald armor. She had changed into a simple black dress. The sling was gone, her arm resting comfortably at her side. She looked out at the lights, feeling a sense of peace so profound it was almost dizzying. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Now," he said, coming to stand beside her. "You build, you create, you change the world, one surgery at a time, and I will make sure that no one ever stands in your light again." She turned to look at him. In the soft glow of the city, his face seemed less severe, the sharp edges softened. She could see the man behind the sovereign, a man who valued strength, who respected intellect, and who moved with a quiet, fierce loyalty to the things and the people he chose to protect. "Why?" she asked again. The same question she had asked on the floor of the hospital corridor, but this time it held a different meaning. It was not about his actions, it was about his motive. He was silent for a long time, his gaze on the horizon. "My grandmother was right," he said finally, his voice a low murmur. "You see the person, not just the problem. In my world, that is a rare and valuable commodity." He turned to her, and his eyes held a startling vulnerability. "I have spent my life surrounded by people who want what I have. You are the first person I have met who seems to understand who I am." She understood. He was as isolated by his power as she had been by her abuse. They were two sides of the same solitary coin. She reached out and, for the first time, initiated contact. She placed her hand on his arm, her fingers resting on the crisp fabric of his shirt. He did not flinch. He did not move at all. He simply stood there, allowing the contact, a silent acknowledgement of the bridge she was building between them. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Mr. Kwan," she said softly, repeating her own words back to him. It was a promise. He looked down at her hand on his arm and then back up to her face. He raised his own hand and gently covered hers, his fingers warm and strong. "Jinwoo," he said. It was not a command. It was an invitation. "Eris," she replied. They stood there for a long time in the quiet solitude of the night, two powerful, complicated people who had found in each other a strange and unexpected peace. The future was not a fairy tale. It would be a negotiation, a partnership built on respect and the daily choice to see each other clearly. But as she looked out at the endless, glittering promise of the city, Eris knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she was finally, truly in the right place. Her work was just beginning, and for the first time, she was not alone.